Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Tim Richards, Technical Services Manager of the Managing General Agents Association, and on behalf of the MGAA, I'd like to welcome you to our briefing this afternoon. This is being delivered by Grant Thornton on the subject of the FCA's approach to risk frameworks and wind-down plans. Before I introduce our presenters, I'd just like to run through a few housekeeping points. Please ensure your microphone and camera are turned off. If you'd like to ask a question, please feel free to use the chat button at the bottom of your screen. Time allowing, these will be asked and answered at the end of the event. If we run out of time, questions will be answered post-event. The presentation is accredited for CPD hours if relevant to your ongoing professional development program. This briefing is being recorded, and a link to the recording will be issued post-event together with the slides and our feedback survey. I'll also post the survey on the Zoom chat, so look out for that. That's a quick way of letting us have your feedback. Please do take the time to complete it. It takes about 2 minutes, and that allows us to deliver the best possible future events to our membership. So to recap, today's briefing is the FCA's approach to risk frameworks and wind-down plans from Grant Thornton. So let me introduce you to our presenters, Bradley Chadwick, Klaas de Vries, Shane Smith, and Toby Dewar. Bradley is an internationally experienced finance and restructuring executive with a successful record in both industry and as an advisor. Bradley has served in roles including CFO, COO, and interim manager. Bradley has worked for a number of stakeholders, including boards, the executives, lenders, and regulators. Klaas is a leading Grant Thornton insurance risk management is leading in the Grant Thornton risk management practice. Klaas has over 25 years experience in the financial services industry with a focus on insurance. Klaas has served in roles including CRO, audit director, and various technical specialisms before. Shane has worked for the Grant Thornton network in restructuring. I think someone's not on mute, so if I can ask you to go on mute, please, that would be great. Thank you. Shane has worked with Grant Thornton Network in restructuring and insolvency, both in the United Kingdom and Australia, for approximately 17 years. Since joining Grant Thornton in 2004, he has assisted on engagements with lenders, regulators, and corporates in a variety of formal and informal engagements such as external administrations, pre-lending and investigative business reviews, viability assessments, and wind-down planning. And last but not least, Toby has worked for Grant Thornton UK LLP for 5 years, spending 4 years in the audit department and over 1 year in restructuring and insolvency. Toby is a qualified chartered accountant and became a member of the Institute of Chartered Accountants in England and Wales in August 2021. He attended the University of Sheffield, where he obtained a degree in economics in 2017. So that's enough of me. So enjoy the briefing, everyone. And Bradley, over to you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much, Tim, and the MGAA for inviting Grant Thornton to spend some time with you and to share insights that we have learned from our engagement experience with clients on risk frameworks and wind-down plans. Just some really high-level introductory remarks before we get into it. The reason we're talking about both wind-down plans and risk frameworks in the same presentations is that we have seen that the FCA really views these as going hand in hand, and so failure to talk about them together risks an opportunity to share insights with you on how they could be working together. So the learning objectives today are we're going to outline the importance of TC2.4 planning and explain where in the FCA guidance this can be found. We're going to describe the focus areas when reviewing your own wind-down plan. We're going to summarize some of the best practices, and then we're going to outline the link between wind-down triggers and risk frameworks in practice, and we're going to explain market practices on stress and reverse stress testing. So that's broadly the learning objectives, so we hope that you will have learned that by the end of the session. We are intending to make this very practical and hands-on, so we will be going through the items on the contents page, which I won't be reading to you because you'll be seeing it as we go through it. So thank you very much, Shane. If we go to introductions, I think Klaas, Tim did a really good introduction, but if you could just introduce yourself, that'd be really great.
Okay, thank you, Brad. Yeah, Klaas de Vries, and everything that Tim said on the call, that's all true, and here I am.
Thanks, Klaas.
Hi everyone, Shane Smith here. I just noticed that I've actually been working for 19 years, so I need to update that. But in addition to that, I also had a secondment at one of the insurance brokers as well to assist them with their wind down plans. That was very helpful and beneficial, and certainly allowed me to get into the weeds of the actual wind down planning, as opposed to what we do sometimes is just reviewing wind down plans and critiquing them.
Super.
Toby, did you?
Yeah, so Toby Dewar, as mentioned before, I've worked with Shane and Brad on a number of wind down plan projects, ranging from helping a firm, helping insurance brokers sort of build their wind down plan from scratch to sort of reviewing the plans that are already in place. Yeah, that's how much time we spent.
Great. Thanks, Toby. Thanks, Shane. Thanks, Klaas. So we thought we'd start with a story on the evolution of wind down planning, because I think for some people who've kept up with the evolution, the FCA's approach makes complete sense. For other people who did a really rigorous piece of work in an earlier stage of evolution, they're sometimes surprised when we say, when we set out what we think the FCA needs to see. So that's the purpose of this slide. So it was 2008, TC 2.4 was introduced by the FCA. And then in 2012, TC 2.4 really was only being pushed by the FCA from a financial resources perspective. And we have seen a number of our clients have used very, very robust Deloitte models that were prepared at the time. And so to our views at the time, Deloitte were very much, it appears Deloitte were leading on this initiative. And they were really robust, sensible financial models on what it would take from a financial perspective to wind the business down. You then jump forward to 2016, during which period of time businesses are still just doing a modeling exercise, and it's largely focused on the larger size of the market. In 2016, the FCA issued its wind down planning guidance for the first time. And this is when they start really along the stretch of saying you need to have operational plans of what you would do if a wind down plan was triggered. This wind down planning guidance is then finalized in June 2020. And we all know that we then get into around, my date's not going to be perfect, but we know that in 2020 we land up in a COVID world. So we also then get DSEO letters out where there are key messages to the market about wind down planning, and that the plans need to ensure there is no market disruption and there's no policyholder detriment. So we start to see the DSEO letter come out, and we start to expect there to be a really quick focus on this. And we spoke to many, we actually presented to the MGAA on this topic in 2020, and we spoke to many of you during that period of time. And it wasn't until December 2021 that the FCA conducted a multi-firm review. And it was a cohort of around 12 entities where they requested in December that pretty much in the first week of January, all the wind down plans be submitted with all the detailed support. We were already at that time engaged by a number of clients. And so those clients submitted their wind down plans. And then the FCA reviewed those, and in September 2020, the FCA wrote to the brokers in the market and gave feedback to those individual brokers, and it also then wrote publicly giving feedback on what good practices look like and what best practice looks like. They also then updated the wind down planning guide on a non-prescriptive basis to suggest things that people could find as being helpful. And then that takes you really through to where we are now. And what we are seeing now is, as a result of that thematic review, a larger population of brokers have been in receipt of letters from the FCA asking to see their wind down plans. And once those wind down plans are reviewed, the FCA writes back suggesting improvements and then requiring an attestation as to both the processes of preparing the wind down plans and to the quantum of the funds that are set aside for TC2.4. So given that's the evolution and that's where we are, Grant Thornton has been working with a number of entities in the market around reviewing their plans, reviewing the liquidity models, amongst other things. And we'll be sharing our insights on an anonymous basis on that during the rest of this call. So I think, Shane, may I pass over to you, please?
Thanks, Bradley. So what is a wind down plan? We'll start with that, and then Klaus will come on to talk about the risk framework. So it's a requirement for under the FCA regulated, for regulated entities. The overarching objective is really to reduce the negative impact that a wind down can have on customers in the industry. So as Bradley said, it's really identifying the steps, having an operational plan, but then also understanding the resources from a financial, obviously money, but also from a non-financial, such as people, systems, data, into group dependencies as well, which will come on as well. But then looking at the plan and identifying what risks and impacts there are to the wind down plan, and just ensuring that there are documented mitigations. You're not going to know exactly what's going to happen in a wind down scenario, but mitigating them or provide mitigations to the best of your ability. So the basis or for a good wind down plan, you need to have the appropriate governance. So governance from a pre-trigger event, so that's the ordinary BAU governance, but then also what does your governance look like upon a trigger event? So the scenario of a wind down has occurred, and then you're monitoring the triggers to determine whether you need to go into actually wind down. And then you've got the governance within the wind down period. So I look at governance across those three different stages. Hopefully you don't need to go into wind down, but you need to have a governance structure in place and documented in the wind down plan. You need to agree a scenario. What is the scenario that will trigger you to going into wind down plan? Is it parental failure? Is it an E&O claim? What is going to be the likely scenario that will trigger a wind down? And then you need to have the planning. The planning itself is a process. It does involve having to reach out to the business. It's not something that's really should be designed by, higher, upper management. You need to understand the nuts and bolts and the impact that it could have on various business units. And then we've touched on this again, and we'll probably say it again throughout, is just undertaking that assessment and kind of identifying the resources that you need, because they're integral. As Bradley said, there was a shift from the financial to the non-financials, but non-financial is just going to be just as important as the financial, because you can have all the money in the world, but that's not going to help you if you've got no one and access to data and systems to help with the wind down. And again, the risk, identifying, mitigating them, and coming on to the risk framework.
Hey Shane, really interesting on that scenario point. I'll talk a little bit about stress and scenario testing later, but I get the question from the market, how many scenarios do we need? So keep that in mind, and then I'll talk about it a little bit later.
Great. Over to you, Toby. Next slide.
Thanks, Shane. So process versus content. So as the illustration shows here, the content is driven from the process, and as Shane mentioned on the last slide, driven from the resources identified. But the key thing to note here is the different considerations needed for process versus content, which is relevant for the wind down plan guidance. So going through the illustration, so client readiness, as it says on the tin, this is the initial steps the entity or the firm needs to take to initiate the wind down plan process. So this will be identifying a project management officer, a project plan, identification of the working group, and who will be responsible for driving the wind down plan. So the process, plan to process is key for a wind down plan, given the size and complexity of the task. The process should include obtaining assumptions of data via engaging with relevant internal and potentially external stakeholders. So it's key in the process that relevant stakeholders are engaged, and it's not just the finance team or the risk team in the firm who write the wind down plan behind closed doors, locked in a room. And from experience of reviewing wind down plans, the process undertaken is something the FCA like to see in reports. So just to emphasise the importance of the process. So the content, so there are specific areas which need to be considered and documented in the wind down plan. So the information, the assumptions, the data, these all need to be obtained through the stakeholder engagement process and shown in the report. And there's a set amount of areas which need to be included in the plan, which I know Shane will talk through in another slide later on, so I won't steal his thunder there. And then the final output of the whole process is the wind down plan itself. There will also be a liquidity model which will be produced alongside this. So I'll pass over to Shane to go through the content in more detail.
Toby, I might just ask for a minute if you don't mind.
Yeah, go for it.
So I think, thanks Toby, really well presented. I think the client readiness point, we want to really reiterate. It sounds so obvious, but actually where we start engagements with organizations where they haven't identified who the working group is, what the steering committee is, who's going to make assumptions on, given the scenario, which Klaas will talk about later, and the triggers, which Klaas will talk about later, who's going to make the assumptions on what activities you're doing thereafter, everything that then gets delayed. And it really slows the process down. So just to reiterate that the client readiness point is typically C-suite commitment to running a robust process. And then from a process perspective, to the extent the process is very well documented and you can evidence that you followed a detailed process, both your internal audit department, who may come and look at it, because some of our clients' internal audit departments are looking at it, and the regulators will be able to quickly get more comfortable that you have engaged with appropriate stakeholders and that the plan is an operable plan, i.e. the people involved with, let's just say it's client monies. The people involved with how you will manage client monies have actually been engaged with and have considered the implications thereof. Toby, thank you so much for that. And sorry I came in to add some context.
No, not sorry.
And sorry, just one more point I wanted to add on to client readiness as well. A lot of the time, this is the first time they're creating a wind down plan. So, they don't know what they don't know. So there is a piece that, there is a degree of sort of an educational piece to understand or to explain, what's worked well in the process and what hasn't worked well. And every business is going to sort of be different in that respect. So the readiness is, just want to emphasize that again for the third time. Apologies. So moving on to the wind down plan content. So, this is a plan that's created at a point in time. So it's a living document. It should be refreshed periodically, whether that's annually or every 2 years. But if there's a fundamental change to your business model, then if you purchase a business or sell a business and it's quite material, then you should really revisit your wind down plan. And the FCA may even, once they see a purchase or a sale, they might actually initiate that discussion. Who knows? So coming down to the wind down plan contents. So the first one, FCA objective and requirements. We suggest that in wind down plans you just reiterate the FCA's requirements and why you're doing it. And that sort of leads on to the rationale. Why you're doing the wind down plan. It's really to mitigate any detriment to the market, to policyholders. Again, moving on to the scenario, what is the likely scenario that will put you in a position where a trigger event occurs and you need to then consider wind down, or is there another solution or a quick solution to avoid wind down as well? Governance, I've touched on that already, to what I call the 3 stages of governance, the BAU governance, the governance during that trigger period before you initiate a wind down, and then ultimately the governance during the wind down period. Impact assessment on stakeholders, this is a critical area. Identifying all the stakeholders within your organization, making sure you understand the impact, making sure you have mitigations in place, and then there's another section, comms, that I'll come on to as well, making sure you communicate. FCA are obviously a key stakeholder, so you really want to be on the front foot and ensure that they're updated with the process and the progress, especially upon a trigger. Operational analysis. So this is really, how the wind down plan will operate, who is needed, how is it going to be actioned, very much a sort of a step plan. Resource assessment, again, we've touched on that, what is needed, financial versus non-financial. And then communications plan. We often see people look at it as a 72-hour, 3-day plan. Upon a trigger event, who do you contact? What is the key message? Upon a wind down plan, who do you contact? What is the key message? Again, you don't need to write communications. It's just purely identifying who will you contact with, when, and that key message. And all that wind down plan really sits in the wider TC2.4, which is the risk management framework, and then class will talk about that as well as the stress testing and reverse stress testing. Wind down plans, and we may say this word again throughout the presentation, should be proportionate to the organization. You could go to town and you could really do a very detailed wind down plan, and that should be certainly the focus. But you need to rely on the business as well. So it is a time-consuming process, and you do need resources to actually prepare it as well.
Shane, I'll come in with a quick comment. Yeah, I think for me the wind down plan sits within the risk management framework, and it's having a solid risk management framework as the basis that you can then use to develop your triggers and your scenarios. I think I found with clients that don't necessarily have that solid risk management framework as the basis, the scenarios aren't always complete. They choose the wrong triggers. So it kind of leads to issues down the line, but I'll talk about it a little bit later.
So how to produce a wind down plan. So I'll canter through what can be a 2 to 10 month process for a firm. So the key inputs set the foundation of the rationale of the wind down plan and really sets the parameters and overarching assumptions of the plan. So which will then be fed to the internal stakeholders to determine the resources they require. So going through the listed inputs, you've got the scenario, which I think has been mentioned. It's a plausible but severe negative impact on the business. You've then got the triggers, which are generally financial metrics, which once breached will mean the governing body invokes the wind down plan. You've got the governance. So the governance as an input is generally around the oversight and preparation of the wind down plan. So it could be including approvals and sign-off of assumptions. The implementation assumptions, which are key business activities and how long these will last. So those key inputs, as I said, set the parameters for identifying the resources required. And every firm will have a different set of resources they need to identify, different complications they need to overcome. So it really just emphasises that it's not a one-size-fits-all. And that highlights further why the process of internal stakeholder engagement is so important and key. So the resources to be identified on a by-function basis, so the number of people, how long they're needed for, which will, as I've mentioned, are derived from the implementation assumptions. You've got systems and data, so finance systems, HR
Toby,
data. Yeah.
Probably helpful for me to interject and just say, so an implementation assumption would be you would continue to do renewals for 2 months or 3 months. You won't do new business. You will, if you sell a book of business, you will transfer all policyholder administration to the acquirer. You will, all open claims you will run off. It's those kinds of assumptions that are really, really important to make sure they make business sense in the context of your trigger and in the context of your business, and then to document them, because you have to send those assumptions in granular detail to the functions, which Toby's mentioned, because without those granular aligned implementation assumptions, the functions won't be able to identify how many people they need for how long or what computer systems they need. So, sorry, Toby, to interject. I was just trying to bring it alive for the people a little bit. So back to you, Toby, on the resource requirements.
Yeah, nice. Thanks, Brad. So just going through the resources that need to be identified, facilities, so what buildings each function occupy, how long they're going to need them for in the wind down period. Vendors is essentially around sort of critical and key suppliers and considerations of those contracts needing to be continued. Stakeholder assessment, so this involves identifying third parties which may be negatively affected from the wind down plan and the need to document the mitigations. You've got the communication plan, which is around identifying who will prepare these, who will approve these, who will be contacted, the key messages, and intergroup dependencies. So again, this is identifying dependencies that the regulated firm has on other entities within the group. So as a generalization, this could be centralized or shared services such as payroll, HR, or finance. And then we've got the key outputs. So as I've mentioned already in this presentation, the key output is the wind down plan, in which the FCA is entitled to request to review at any point in time. So any firm or company should keep the plan up to date, whether the firm review the plan periodically or when a material change happens in the business. And as an output from the resources you've identified, you get the financial resources, so it's quantifying these assumptions, consolidating them into a cash flow model, as well as operational plans, which are again derived from the resources you identify, which feed into the wind down plan. And lastly, risks and mitigations, which is a requirement in the FCA guidance to document these in the plan. So that's how to produce a wind down plan in a nutshell. I'll pass back to Shane.
Sorry, just to give Toby some credit, he's actually created this, well, what we actually really like, this toolkit, which accountants as we are love a good spreadsheet. So it's a multi-tab spreadsheet that really splits what a usual broker, for example, what their usual business lines are: finance, HR, IT, claims. It's every function, and effectively this toolkit is something you can use after you've identified all your implementation assumptions. As Bradley said, what are the key assumptions that you're going to have going to wind down plan, new business renewals, MTAs, etc. And then that goes out to the business units and asks them to complete, saying this is a scenario, this is the assumptions, how would your business line respond, what systems would be needed. And, it's quite a good detailed a toolkit. So we use this with our clients to actually help them with this process. So that's something that we've just designed over time, preparing wind down plans for our clients. So just give Toby some kudos for that. So common shortfalls. A lot of these I saw with the large broker that I was on secondment with, because it was their first wind down plan. It's certainly the first one focusing on non-financial resources. You've got your practical wind down plan, which is your living document, but then you've got your liquidity model that attaches to that as well. So some of the shortfalls, so the triggers, really lacking specificity and being required for a solvent wind down. And there may be, in your scenario, there might be an insolvent trigger. Maybe it's solvent for a period and then it goes insolvent. So there's very different things to consider in a liquidity model when you're talking about an insolvent solution. Or an insolvent outcome, not really a solution. I wouldn't say it's a solution, but you really need to look at that separately. Lack of detailed rigor around the process. I think we've mentioned it a few times now that there should be a process. It should be documented. And, once you document that process for the first time, it helps with future iterations. So you can go back to that process, refine it, or just go through the same process as you did before and get it updated. Intergroup dependencies is a really hot topic. The FCA has issued separate guidance around this. And what we've seen is, given the international element of some of our clients is, they've got US parents, or they have, US parents that are controlling contracts. So there's a group contract that's held in an entity that's not in the regulated entity. So, if a wind down plan is triggered, how does that regulated entity benefit from those contracts if they're not actually in that company's name? Is there economies of scale where that contract is taking advantage of, say, 10 companies using those services? Is there a separate company that deals with the employees? So, if there's a trigger event, can you control the employees to help with the winding down the regulated entity? So it's understanding these dynamics, the contractual relationship, the restrictions, foreign restrictions perhaps. It's a huge area and always has a lot we have a lot of feedback to our clients around this, and just making sure it's properly documented and thought through. Lack of consideration or options, alternatives. So, during that period, a scenario has occurred, a trigger event's occurred, and you're deciding whether you have to initiate the wind down plan. Is there another solution that can avoid going into wind down? Is there a white knight that can, ride on in and actually help, and perhaps purchase it and avoid wind down? Something that can happen in reality quite quickly, but something that should be considered. Other options as well. Lack of effective governance or leadership. So again, down to the process as well, and just making sure that you have a clearly documented governance process, because in a wind down scenario is very, very different to a BAU scenario. You're going to be relying upon risk colleagues. You're going to be relying upon HR very heavily. You're going to be relying upon IT. You're not going to need a marketing team. You're not going to need, if you're not doing any new business, then obviously business units are going to be impacted as well. Lack of detail in the cash flow forecast, or what we also call liquidity model. Identifying, there's going to be assumptions around your financial model, which your finance team will have to get involved in. Making sure they're documented. You don't necessarily have to share them with, to that granular detail with the FCA, but you certainly need to have them documented so that you can answer questions if they have that on the liquidity model. Cash, client monies, how are funds going to be repatriated? Very different scenario. If it's insolvent, you may not even be able to deal with those funds. But if it's a solvent outcome, it should be sort of BAU. We've got colleagues that we get involved in cash because of the complications around that. But considerations around how you'll get money, out of those client monies accounts, or not identifying third-party providers and understanding the contractual position. So this is similar to, is the regulated entity able to take advantage of that contract, which I sort of mentioned before from intergroup dependencies perspective as well. Funding considerations, again, very different for solvent for insolvent. If you're solvent, then you'll have to make redundancy payments. If you're insolvent, you don't need to make redundancy, or you don't make redundancy payments. There's property implications if you're solvent versus insolvent, whether you need to pay dilapidation. So there's all these sort of nuances. Predominantly the scenarios that we see are solvent. So, insolvent's not sort of a scenario that you need to focus on, but maybe it is. If your wind down plan goes for 12 months, maybe it gets to a point in month 9 where, you have to consider an insolvent option. Not starting with a risk framework. So, that's sort of certainly class's position. So it's probably a nice segue over to you, Klaas.
I think there's one more before I'm up, Shane.
Jump the gun.
So, costing and liquidity model. So the purpose of TC2.4 is to ensure that there's adequate financial resources to perform an orderly wind down, which essentially means building a cash flow liquidity model with the resources identified, and identifying the peak liquidity requirement within the model. And that peak liquidity requirement is then what goes in the ring-fenced cash account to perform the wind down, if and when it's ever needed in practice. So for the process is generally done from the finance team at the firm. So naturally, these will need to be engaged and onboarded early on in the process. Agreed template structure. So as I've mentioned already today, that the process involves engaging various internal stakeholders, and we find the most efficient way to engage these individuals is to have a standardized template, which can then be sent to each one with relevant questions on to tease out the resources that they require. So what systems they need, number of employees, etc. These templates are then sent out to each functional lead. They're received back by the finance team. They're reviewed. There's generally iteration process required just to fill in any gaps in knowledge that functional leads may not have regarding wind down planning. And these assumptions are then and data is then collated, quantified, and then built, and then the liquidity model is then built. It's important to note that there needs to be an overlay of non-BAU costs in the model. So this would be things such as facility exit costs, if applicable, retention bonuses, redundancy costs, etc. And then the cash receipts need to be modelled based on the implementation assumptions. So as Bradley mentioned earlier, the implementation assumption is that there's no new business, revenue and cash receipts thereafter the new business revenue will need to be stripped out of future cash receipts. And if renewals only go up from month 1 to month 6, then after month 6, there's no revenue or receipts from renewals. So solvent and insolvent, I know Shane's just mentioned some of this, but from a liquidity model point of view, at the end of the wind down period, whether it's 6 months or 24 months, if there is a cash surplus at the end of this period, then it would be deemed a solvent wind down. And as again Shane mentioned, this is generally what I've seen when I've been doing my reviews. However, if there is a negative cash balance at the end of this period, then it would be an insolvent wind down. And yeah, there are then implications and other considerations that need to be made, such as employee claims, landlord claims, the headcount and timeframes. So common findings and areas that firms can improve on in regards to the liquidity model. So timing of the asset sale proceeds. And this is quite a hot topic of the FCA that they pick up. And just to know, as is documented on that bullet point, it's specifically around the cash receipt on the sale of assets. It's not so much when the sale is completed, it's when the cash then comes into the company. Timing of invoking the wind down plan. So for seasonal renewals, if you say month 1 of the liquidity model is the month after all the renewals occur, then there's going to be a large cash receipt in month 1 in the liquidity model, and it's going to be much more favourable liquidity model. Similarly with BAU discretionary bonuses, if you plan to have them 3 months before invoking the wind down plan, then again, that's going to be beneficial to the liquidity model. And it's worth noting that the FCA do pick up these things, so it's much better to be sort of prudent in these areas rather than making sort of aggressive assumptions. Ensuring implementation assumptions flow through the wind down plan and liquidity model. So although the wind down plan and liquidity model are separate documents, then there's a significant amount of interconnectedness between the two. So it's important that the assumptions documented in the wind down plan are filtered through to the liquidity model. Stranded costs need to be considered. So, yeah, if books of business are sold, but there are IT costs which remain within the entity, the runoff of these costs need to be considered in the model. You can't just say we sold the business; they can't be considered. And NST. So the ring-fenced client monies need to remain whole throughout the process, and if they don't, this needs to be documented and modelled on what happens in a pooling event. And now I think it's Class's turn to talk about risk management framework.
Thank you, Toby. It feels like the anticipation has been boiled in the room. Okay, so I think what I'm wanting to do is cover risk management framework, some key points around the risk management framework and how it links up to the wind down plan, look at stress and scenario testing, and close off with some thoughts around reverse stress testing. So I think when I kind of look at a risk management framework and how it connects to the wind down plan, I think there are 3 things that's really important for me. And the first one is whether your company have identified all the relevant risks. So the risk taxonomy complete. Now, a risk taxonomy is just kind of a list of what are the risks that you as a company are exposed to, and examples of that are market risk, credit risk, liquidity, etc. I think one key point on the risk taxonomy is that the more granular the more granular the risk function can make the risk taxonomy, and the more granular risks they identified, the more complete the process forward will be. Shane, I think it was you that mentioned proportionality. So, I do think it's important that the risk taxonomy and whatever you do in the risk management framework is proportionate to the size, complexity of your organization. I think that's a Solvency II term, actually, but yeah. Okay, so that was the first point that's important to me as risk taxonomy. The second point is risk appetite and key risk indicators. And the reason that this is important is because I think this forms the basis of the articulation of your wind down triggers. So I've given a little example on the right-hand side. I'll talk to that in a bit. But just quickly, what is risk appetite? Risk appetite are the parameters set by the board, given to management. Say, look, management, these are the boundaries that you can conduct business within. And typically, we would expect to see a risk appetite statement for each risk in your risk taxonomy. Risk appetite is then measured, so actual exposures against the appetite statements are measured, and key risk indicators are used to do that that measurement. So key risk indicators are a host of indicators, almost like key performance indicators, but it's not measuring performance; it's measuring risk. Okay, so then in terms of how does it link to the risk, to the wind down planning, I think wind down triggers for me is the point at which risk exposure against your appetite becomes so big that a wind down decision is required by the board. The little example that I've given on this slide is talking about what are the different categories of risk taking. So the first kind of large category there is business is operating within their risk appetite, and that's either within the target risk appetite or just slightly outside of risk appetite, but there's a tolerance that still indicates that the risk can be moved back into the target risk kind of section. Then secondly, there is instances where companies will then operate outside the risk appetite statement, and there again for me two categories there. One where companies are breaching risk appetite but can still pull it back into the target range. And at the point when breaching risk appetite becomes so big and the financial impact of that becomes so big that it can't be pushed back into the target risk appetite anymore, that's then, in my mind, the point at which, wind down occurs or a wind down decision is required. And those can then start to become the basis for your wind down triggers. I think a couple of observations from the market from my side. Most of my clients have started by kind of connecting their top 10 risks with wind down planning as well. So they kind of looking at their risk appetite and saying, right, where's that point of breach? But they're also looking at the top 10, 5, call it 20, whatever, top tier risks companies have identified, and saying what is the financial impact of these top 10 risks, and how will that then result in us reaching the point of wind down. Yeah, so I think those are the points that I wanted to cover on this slide. The next section is around stress and scenario testing. Now, when you talk to the actuaries, they get very excited about what is a stress and what is a scenario and how the two is different. Now, I simply think about the stress as the financial or non-financial impact on a single risk factor. So, if you think back to the risk taxonomy that I spoke about earlier, what is the financial impact of a risk event in one of those categories of risks? The scenario is then the combination of a number of risks and the financial impact of that combination. So why do we do stress and scenario testing? And for wind down planning, I think for me the key purpose is to identify that scenario that will result in breach or wind down. So it's really there to kind of help you to get to the point to say, look, what is my primary wind down scenario? And in that process, you may identify and articulate a number of scenarios. I've actually had a call with a client this morning, and he asked me how many scenarios do we need? And you know, it's really difficult to answer that one. I think at a minimum there need to be a primary wind down scenario that feeds into the wind down plan. But in the process of getting to that point, I do think multiple scenarios need to be considered. The other concept I wanted to cover off on this slide is financial resources versus non-financial resources. So the stress and scenario testing environment need to consider both. So what is the impact of severe scenario on liquidity, capital, or your balance sheet position? Those are the financial resources. And on the non-financial resources side, examples are what is the impact of a severe event on sorry, apologies, on your workforce, on your third-party suppliers, on your IT systems. So there's a number of non-financial resources that kind of needs to be considered. I think the most common primary scenarios that I've seen in the market so far includes in a group, loss of group support, or the inability to raise capital from investors for those companies who are PE backed. I've seen the E&O event as quite a common operational type risk scenario, because that has got multiple impacts. It's got an impact on the reputation. It's got a regulatory impact, financial loss, etc. I've seen cyber and data as a common scenario. So what is the impact of a cyber event on the organization? And that affects your ability to use your IT systems. It may result in GDPR breaches, which will then result in regulatory fines, and it's got a reputational impact. And then I think lastly, especially in the brokerage market, I've seen scenarios around regulatory breaches, so anti-money laundering, sanctions type breaches. So hopefully that gives you a good overview of what stress and scenario testing is, how it's used, and also what are kind of those scenarios that we see in the market. I'll hand over to myself for the last slide. So reverse stress testing. And again, if you talk to actuarial colleagues, they get really, really excited about the concept. But reverse stress testing for me is simply establishing how far a plausible combination of risk factors can be stressed to create a black swan event. So this is now where you're going to start with the outcome, right? So the thinking is, I've breached my trigger scenario, and we have to go into wind down. So that's kind of the starting point. Then one actually thinks backwards, right, and think, what are the scenarios that will result in us getting us to that breach point? And what you then do along the way is kind of you challenge your forward-thinking process backwards and saying, have I thought about all the relevant risks that can happen during that can actually happen and occur in the company breaching the wind down trigger. So it's a bit of an integrity exercise that's done over the forward-thinking process. So the example that I've got on the slide here is you kind of start with the insolvent illiquid position and then work backwards to identify those plausible but severe scenarios that may result in that insolvency or illiquid position. I've seen in practice, many companies running their forward-thinking and backwards-thinking process together. So, immediately after having come up with a scenario, almost backtesting that scenario with a reverse stress test. Okay, I think a key observation for me around reverse stress testing is that it's not about the number, it's not about the outcome, right? Because you start with the outcome. I think it's about involving a diverse, kind of a diverse community in the organization to help think through what can actually cause us to be in an insolvent or a liquid position. So it's about what we learn from the organization. It's about how robust our firm's capital is. It's about how resilient the firm is. And, have we actually come up with the right wind down scenarios? I think those are the points that I wanted to cover. So I'm not sure who I'm handing back to, but I will put this one up, and maybe Bradley, it's back to you.
Yeah, I think we just go back to the slide right at the top or on the learning objectives, if you don't mind, class.
Okay, cool.
Or it might be at the back as well. I think
there you go. It's right at the back.
Super. So I think we just reiterate the learning objectives, which is we have outlined the importance of TC2.4, and in the slide deck at the back is a slide where the FCA guidance is. Can we just go to that, please, Toby or class?
So which one you want to go back to?
There's a slide where we say where the FCA guidance can be found. That
one there. Yeah.
Perfect. Yeah. Cool. So we've told you where you can find the guidance. Great. Back to the learning objectives, please, class. Super. We've described the focus areas of the wind down plan. We've summarized some of the best practices, which includes Toby's new tool. We've outlined the link between wind down triggers and the risk framework, and we've explained market practices on stress testing. So we hope we have delivered your learning objectives for your CPD, and we'd love to take some questions. So I think we look in the chat, don't we, Shane?
Yeah, I did have a direct question that came to me, so I'll just quickly read that out, and I can answer that as well. I've tried to post back, but yeah, can you renew existing policies in wind down or not? So the answer is yes. The focus has to be mitigating detriment. So we often see a renewals period where you permit renewals maybe for 30 days, but consideration should also be given to insurance that cannot be easily replaced. You might need to consider allowing those renewals for a longer period because, again, the focus is detriment. So you don't just want to put a cold hard stop saying no renewals at all, because you need to ensure that they can, get replacement cover.
So to put thanks, Shane, to put a finer point on it, when we've done, let me answer with an FCA lens, and then when we've worked with distressed entities, the FCA lens appears to be that if you don't have an existing client, issuing a new policy to them when you're in a wind down could represent an opportunity of detriment to the policyholder, because you may not be there in 6 months to the policyholder administration. So that appears to be, and it seems intellectually sensible to us. However, if you've got an existing policyholder where a renewal notice has gone out and where you haven't non-renewed, failing to do the renewal could result in them inadvertently going without insurance. So that's essentially the summary. What we've seen in distress situations, the insurance carrier whose products you distribute will be as interested as you are in ensuring that the policyholders, there's no policyholder detriment. So it'll be working with them on what period of renewals you continue to do. And to Shane's point, where there are policyholders who perhaps have made a claim on their policy, so they're not going to find it easy to get replacement cover. If you don't renew them, what does that mean? Or if you've got policyholders who've got credit products, which are important to them, and replacing a credit product is going to be different. Again, the FCA will, and because we have had to answer these questions, will expect in a real life scenario that you've taken those kinds of things into account. So it's the granularity of understanding who could experience detriment as a result.
Thanks, Bradley. And we do have probably, I think, the last question looking at the time. This is from David Coop. Thanks, David. So what effect has the consumer duty had on winding down plans?
Shall I attempt to take this, Brad?
Thanks, Lars.
So I think customer risk is a key. I've seen customer risk as a key risk in many organizations. So what is the risk of customers providing poor outcomes to customers? So that is a risk that I've seen in the risk taxonomy. And then I have seen scenarios being developed where the customer where there's a poor customer outcome and there are reputational loss and legal ramifications off the back of that. I have not yet seen that ended up as a primary scenario in a company, but it doesn't mean that it can't end up as one of the primary scenarios. But I've definitely seen it being considered as a scenario. Brad, I don't know whether you wanted to add anything to that.
No, I think Klaas, you've done a great job on that.
Great, thank
Tim,
you.
may I ask an additional question, or do you want to wrap up?
Yeah, I think there's two other questions actually. So I think now it's 1:58, so I think we ought to start wrapping up, I'm afraid. Those additional questions I'll pass across to you if I may, and if you could deal with those afterwards, that'd be great. Just to say, please do let us have your feedback. I've actually put a message on the chat. So that's the first one there. For some reason I put, please let us your feedback. More haste, less speed. But if you can follow that link, you can give us your feedback, which would be most helpful. So it just remains for me to say thanks so much for your presentation today, Bradley, Klaas, Shane and Toby. And thanks to all of you for joining us. Please don't forget to provide your feedback, as I've said, and look out for forthcoming MGAA events. Just a reminder that our capacity exchange event sponsored by Gamma is at 9:30 to 12:30 at America Square, London, this Thursday. Full details are available on our website. Hope you all have a good afternoon. Thanks again for joining us and see you all soon.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Thanks, everyone.
Cheers.
Thanks,
Bye.
Cheers. Bye-bye.